So today, in today's session, or rather support group, we're going to be unpacking the complexities of shame and guilt. Right, so there's just an error there, sorry. So today we're going to unpack shame and we're going to unpack guilt. So shame and guilt are two feelings or concepts that people who have loved ones suffering from addiction experience quite a lot. So we're going to unpack those in order to help you almost also process your own guilt, figure out where you are in terms of the guilt that you might be experiencing and the shame that you might be experiencing. However, before we start with the presentation, we're just going to unpack and almost define the two concepts for better understanding. Right. Shame is a feeling of embarrassment or humiliation that arises from one having the perception that they've done something wrong, they've done something dishonorable, immoral, or improper. Right. Shame becomes problematic when one internalizes it. So the internalization of shame almost leaves one or puts one in a position where they harshly evaluate themselves, where they harshly judge themselves. So once shame is internalized, it leaves one really harshly evaluating themselves and that's almost impacting their sense of self and how they view themselves overall because of the harsh evaluation or the judgment that they would have placed on themselves. Guilt is an emotional experience that occurs when a person believes or realizes, correctly or not, that they have compromised their values or morality in a way. Guilt is feeling self-conscious, experiencing a sense of distress about your potential responsibility for a negative outcome. Other psychological models suggest that guilt rather comes from a personal sense of love and compassion towards others, and it is a result of feeling responsible for harming something you value or you hold dear. So you're not going to feel guilty if you don't value or hold at a high regard the person or that's something that is making you feel guilty. Guilt is the sense that harm was done to you or to another person, and the blame will fall at your feet. So the difference between shame and guilt is that guilt is about wrong actions, and shame is about you being wrong. So that is the difference between the shame and the guilt. So when you look at guilt, it is when you how you feel and your reaction and your interpretation of wrong actions. But shame, you take it on to be symbolic of who you are, that you are wrong as a person, you have flaws, and your way of being is flawed, and your actions are wrong. That is shame and that is guilt. So research highlights that families or parents of individuals suffering from addiction often carry the feelings of guilt. Sorry for that. Please go back to the last slide, Kara. The previous one? Yes. Research highlights that parents or families of individuals suffering from addiction often carry feelings of guilt or shame. So these feelings could be when a person experiences the feelings of shame or feelings of guilt, it could almost feel similar to having like a sense of loss or a sense of you grieving for something or emotional turmoil. So the reason why it almost feels like loss or it almost feels like grief is because each family has envisioned a life for their loved ones, has envisioned a life with them and a life for them. So when a person has, or rather is suffering from addiction, the life that you have envisioned for them becomes almost disrupted. So then because it's not unfolding the way that you as a family or as loved ones have envisioned for your loved one, it then becomes a sense of loss, as though you're mourning what you had hoped and what you had wanted for your loved one. Addiction leads to consequences not only for the individual, but also for those closest to them. Family members of persons with addiction often face negative consequences on family relationships, social life, and mental health. So the dynamics within the family change because you find family members sometimes blaming each other. You find that sometimes the parents are blamed either for the way they've parented their children or the lack of boundaries or whatever it is that they might be blamed for because of their children who are suffering from addiction. The social life, Shame and guilt makes people withdraw. Mental health. Imagine the burden that families with addicts, families of people suffering with addiction carry. So their mental health also becomes impacted. The distress that they face on a daily basis while they're trying to help and they help their loved ones, or almost also cope with what they're going through as well. The responsibility of parents, families for their loved ones' addiction is maintained through both societal expectations of caregivers and the general belief about what it means to be a good parent, as the children's future is often seen as determined by the parents' parenting ability. It is viewed that people develop problems as a result of parenting shortcomings, and this is often reflected in parents' tendencies to blame themselves. You're, there's this just expectation that one's children are supposed to turn out a certain way, that good enough parenting almost produces results of a good child or good adult in the future. And when this doesn't materialize, like I said earlier on, the caregivers, the family are blamed, because it almost is like their parenting abilities have been weighed because of the actions of their child or the actions of their loved ones who are then battling with addiction. One important motive behind human behavior and action is the wish to avoid shame. As shame arises in the interactions with others, there is an effort to avoid interaction that can give rise to the feeling of withdrawal, isolation. Withdrawal can thus be seen as a natural part of shame reaction. Nobody wants to be in a space where they feel like they're going to be judged. No one wants to be in a space where they feel like their parenting is going to be put under some sort of microscope to say, your child is like this because of you. Your loved one is like this because of you. So in order to avoid those feelings, in order to avoid feeling bad, feeling guilty, feeling the shame, families of addicts withdraw, they isolate, because it's much easier that way, because you don't always have to answer for what is happening with your child. Why is your child like this? Where is your child? Why did you let your child get to the point that they are? Or why did you let your spouse, why did you let your brother, your sister get to the space or the point that they are in their current functioning? So stigma research also has shown that disclosure can reduce shame. We understand that it's very difficult to disclose. It's something that sometimes people find shameful. But once you disclose, once you talk about it, the shame also subsides. It doesn't mean that sometimes it gets taken away, because there's still other influences and other treatments that you're going to get from others around you. But once you've owned it, once you've spoken it, and once you've taken it out there, it almost then reduces just slightly the shame that is associated with having a family member who battles or suffers from addiction. Families of those who suffer from addiction experience a lack of knowledge and empathy, as well as accusing attitudes within their social networks. Like I said, it's always, or rather it's painted as though there's something wrong that you as a family should have done. There's something wrong that you as a spouse are doing. There's something wrong that you as the children of the addicts are doing. So people around you, the social networks, don't always understand. They don't have the knowledge, they don't have the empathy, because of the disease, right? Sometimes people, when it's a different type of disease, they are understanding, but because of the stereotypes that are associated or are linked to addiction, the understanding and the empathy from people is quite limited, because it almost is like addiction is like a criminal like behavior. It's deviance, right? So there is no understanding. Sometimes there is no empathy that is shown to people, or rather to families of those who are suffering from addiction. They are criticized for being too harsh towards their children, or their loved ones, or accused of setting too few boundaries and thus enabling and reinforcing their problems. How many of you have heard that you have contributed to the state, or to your child or your loved one suffering from addiction? How many of you have heard that you've spoiled them, you've enabled them, you've given them a lot of money, you've given them a lot of freedom, you've done this, you've done that, you've done this, you know? Either you would be then told to say it's because you were too harsh, that the person or your loved one then wanted an outlet, or you were too lenient, you didn't have boundaries. That is why they then I don't want to say developed this behavior, but that is why then they are now suffering or living with addiction, because either your boundaries were too open, you didn't enforce laws, you didn't enforce ways of conduct in the household, etc., etc. Sorry.
Palesa, I think if I can just jump in there as well, if that's okay. I do see that hand raised earlier as well, but I just wanted to add in there that even the knowledge of shame and guilt, the being told that because you were too strict, or the opposite, because you were too lenient, that, like you said, has led to the potential of this developed behavior. The knowledge of it doesn't simply make it go away, right? And even though being told it's okay, it doesn't make it go away. And I think it's something that a lot of family members might experience. And I think it was Eliajo that had your hand up. I don't know if you still have a question that you'd like to ask.
Hi, Karen. No, it's fine. I think it was covered. Thanks.
Okay, all right. Yes, you'd
We'll
like to
also
carry on.
allow more room for questions later on, and almost like an open dialogue or discussion.
Absolutely.
Next slide, Kara. So there are different categories of shame, right, that one might experience. So there's the first one called the hot response. So with hot response is when a person who feels ashamed or rather defensive, then they, in their way of responding, will either lash out in anger or attack the next person as a way of deflecting the attention from themselves. Because feeling shameful is a very uncomfortable like space, or an uncomfortable emotion. So it almost then feels like you are under the spotlight. Everybody's looking at you. Everybody is just focusing on you. So in order to then almost deviate or deflect that attention from you, you are going to either act out or lash out in anger, right? So the hot response is usually an impulsive reaction. The second one is behaviors to cope with or conceal shame. Doing things that make yourself feel small, trying to avoid being the center of attention, or not sharing your thoughts or feelings. Concealing yourself is a method of self-protection. You're protecting yourself. So a lot of people, to cope and to deal with the shame that they're experiencing, is better to keep to yourself. Earlier on, we spoke of the isolating, the withdrawal. So others just don't share, just conceal the shame, and that is a way of just protecting themselves, because people can be judgmental and not everybody is going to understand what you're going through. That is why it's very important to attend such platforms where you're going to be with families who are in similar situations, who are going to be better understanding and less judgmental to the situations that you find yourself in, because generally out there, people are really harsh and judgmental and just voice their opinions very strongly at times. So the third category of shame is safety behaviors to avoid shame or being discovered. This includes apologizing, crying, or avoiding conflict. People who have a tendency towards being emotional or avoiding conflict may be more likely to engage in safety behaviors. Withdrawal is one example of the safety behavior, right? Anything that is going to protect you from that feeling, anything that is going to protect you from feeling like you are being exposed. People who engage in safety behaviors will do anything just to make sure that they don't feel exposed, they don't feel shameful, the guilt. So it almost feels like it's easier for them to then process and deal with the shame and the guilt by themselves in an isolated space and not be with everybody else. The fourth category is behaviors to repair shame. This includes soothing yourself or apologizing to others. For example, if you forgot something important, you might tell yourself that you had a lot on your mind, or engage in gestures to show that you are sorry. So it almost is compensating, but not really compensating, right? Because of everything that is happening, right? It almost, you'd want to then compensate, or but let's stick rather to repay. You're going to do something that is going to almost replace the feeling of shame that you'll be feeling and you'll be experiencing because of the associated feelings that come with having families or loved ones who are suffering from addiction. So types of guilt, right? So we have the first one, deontological. Yes, this is the guilt that comes from breaking personal values or morals. And I think this one is quite important in that, as I'm saying this, reflect for yourselves. How many of you have compromised your personal values and morals to accommodate your loved one suffering from addiction? How many of you have gone against what you believe, have gone against what you hold so as truth, what you hold so dear and close to you, because you wanted to accommodate your loved one, because you were aiding them in any shape or form? So anything that you have done that almost breaks what you believe in as a person almost creates or produces this type of guilt, because it's not what you are comfortable with doing, but you're doing it because of your loved one, and that comes with it uncomfortable situations, uncomfortable emotions and feelings, because a part of you knows you're not supposed to be doing that. A part of you knows that that is not okay. So you're almost then compromising yourself because of wanting to accommodate your loved one. And this also comes with the understanding that people who are suffering from addiction can be very manipulative. So sometimes you're not necessarily aware that you're compromising your own personal values and morals. It's only maybe later, upon reviewing and reflecting on the situation, that you realize to say, but I have overstepped my own personal boundaries. I have overstepped what I believed in, simply because I chose to accommodate or to aid this person in their addiction. Altruistic guilt. So this is empathetic guilt from causing harm to someone else. The times when you have not been boundaried, you were harming your loved one. The times when you should have stood up, but you didn't, take a stance that could have protected them in that specific situation, in that specific instance, or whatever it is that they were going through. Then later on, when you reflect or look back at the situation, is to say, but I could have, I should have, I could have done something, and as a result this person finds themselves in this situation. Or rather, some of you might even be feeling that taking them to rehab was causing them harm, and then you could be experiencing this altruistic guilt that is spoken of here, because you would be feeling in this present moment that you are causing them harm, and then as a result of feeling that you're causing them harm, then you feel or you experience this type of empathetic guilt. So a third form of guilt is existential guilt, which is often regularly mentioned and defined as experiencing guilt for not living up to your expectations and life purpose. Let me take it back to parents, right? There's this an unspoken expectation that a parent protects, a parent loves, a parent nurtures and grooms their children, gives them the best of what life has to offer, right? So if your child, or you find your child, or your child almost deviates from what we spoke about earlier on, from the life that you had envisioned for them, you find yourself experiencing this type of guilt because you're not living up to your expectations of what a parent is. You're not living up to your life purpose. And this could be something that you feel very strongly, and you might feel that you have failed either as a brother, as a sister, as a spouse, as a parent, because in your mind, because of their behavior, you have failed them. You've not lived up to be the protector that you believe or you expect yourself to have been. You have not been the guider. You've not steered them in the right direction. And you might find yourself experiencing this type of guilt. Whether it's true or not is really not important, but because you have these expectations of yourself, you experience this type of guilt because you have not lived up to expectations. You have not protected them, you've not guided them, you've not done all that you could as what you were supposed to, or you believe you were supposed to do for them. Other researchers propose that guilt can also be broken down into two additional subtypes, including non-related guilt, which is guilt that arises without a clear relationship between your actions and an outcome, survivor guilt, or inequality guilt, a sense of guilt based on circumstances of imbalance, gender bias, or racial discrimination. Experiences of shame and guilt. Families of those who suffer from addiction become potential targets for judgment and blame. However, in as much as the outside world, social networks judge and blame the families judge and blame themselves too. We could have done our best. Did we really do our best? What is happening? Is that a reflection of us as individuals? Is that a reflection of us as a family? Many families ask themselves the questions, why? Why my child? Why my husband? Why my sister? Why my loved one? And what have I done wrong? So you internalize the addiction. You internalize the addiction to be something that you could have done, that you could have contributed towards. This is a constant, there is a constant self-blame and retrospective reflection on their abilities, the ability to parent, the ability to be a good spouse, the ability to support your loved one, the ability to be a good sister, a good brother, or just an exemplary person in your loved one's life. Were you a good enough example to that person? Why, if you're a good enough example, is my loved one suffering from addiction? It is important for many families to show that they've given their children or their loved ones what they needed, that they had an education and good finances. Sometimes this could be interpreted as a wish to provide a counterpoint of the stereotypical image of problematic families that is often presented as a risk factor for the development of addiction. Many families feel that they have to defend themselves against the negative attitudes of people in their surroundings who have implied that they have made mistakes and that they are somewhat to blame for their loved one's addiction. Families are often expected or encouraged to put their foot down, throw out the child, and close the door. I spoke of this earlier on to say there's almost this blaming or this judgment from others to say, you didn't have boundaries, you were not firm enough, you could have done A, B, C, D. I know with some people who even say, but how can you not handle, or not, how are you unable to handle your own child? You know, so there's always going to be those kind of negative attitudes from people who don't understand or are not in a similar situation. This shows that families were not only blamed in relations to the addiction, but that they were also seen as responsible for continued use and their recovery. If a child, or if a loved one that is in active addiction, or rather is recovering from the addiction, should they relapse, it's still then taken back to the family to say, you've done this wrong. You still didn't create a conducive environment for them. You didn't support them. You didn't do A, B, C, and D. Forgetting the fact that the addict also has personal responsibility and personal accountability in their lives, in their story, and in their process of recovery or in their addiction. Selective openness. Families choose who to tell as they fear the attitude people have of addicts. This concealment and not being comfortable to talk about the situation often lead to feelings of being alone in dealing with the addiction. Some families described what can be labeled alienation. In many ways, their life changes, their social interactions suddenly are strange, uncomfortable, and accompanied by a lot of emotional distress, because addiction is strongly stigmatized, associated with crime, desperation, and unpredictability. Like I said earlier on, should a person say they have, let's say, for instance, diabetes, because we are of the understanding that addiction is a mind disease. So, but people don't get that. So if a person, let's say, for example, has like diabetes, people are fine with that. They're really accepting of that. But because there's no knowledge of addiction, it's viewed as like deviant behavior, defiant behavior. It's often associated with people who do crime, people who are unpredictable in their behavior, people who are not safe, people who are antisocial, people who have lost, are out of order, basically, right? So when being a family, rather, having a loved one who's an addict, it almost, for some people, feel like even your dynamics of your social interactions change, because it almost feels like your loved one is being perceived as this good for nothing, this person who's out of order, this person who is dangerous to the society, this person who should be put away and never to interact with other people. So this then does impact relationships that you as the family have with your social networks, your friends, your community at large. How many times has your loved one in the community been labeled as something that they're not, simply because they're an addict? Signs of guilt. These are quite unique in the sense that people experience it differently. But there are common signs, or rather symptoms of guilt that you might find that everyone shares. So there is low self-esteem. There is excessive attempts at reparation. Being unable to meet someone's gaze. If you're interacting with people in your community, you can't be assertive in your stance. You're shying away from looking at them, even when you're talking to them, because you feel guilty of what your loved one has done, or how they've experienced your loved one, or the fact that your loved one is an addict. Facial blushing, anxiety, trouble sleeping, nausea, headaches, depressed mood, avoidance of people, places, or events linked to the cause of guilt, shifts in energy levels, emotional outbursts. This one is quite important in the sense that having a loved one who suffers from addiction is a lot. The psychological distress that comes with that is a lot. And so many times the families are so concentrated on getting their loved one help that they neglect themselves. So everything just piles up and piles up and piles up. And it gets to a point where you just explode because it's too much. And one sometimes hasn't mastered the need to also unpack, also deal with what you have been through as your loved ones are getting treatment. It's also pivotal that you as a family, you as their loved ones, also unpack, also process the damage, the hurt, the emotional turmoil, the financial consequences that you have experienced. May it also be an encouragement to say, don't pile up everything, right? They've caused emotional distress, right? They've caused conflict, some of them in the family to a large extent. But all of this thing of always piling it up, and almost focusing on them and what they need is important, yes, but what do you need? What do you need to take care of so that you too are functional, that you too are okay, and you don't then almost increase your chances of mental health issues? And then the last one is appetite changes. Strategies to reduce shame and guilt. It's very important that you explore your shame and your guilt. Understand it. Where does the shame come from? Is the shame does it come from the fact that your loved one is an addict? Does the shame come from the fact that you feel like you've not done enough? Does the shame come from the fact that you fear being judged? Where does the shame come from? What causes the guilt? What are you guilty about? Are you guilty? Are you feeling guilty because you feel like you failed your loved one? Are you feeling guilty because you feel like you were not harsh enough, or you didn't enforce discipline enough? Whatever it is for you, explore where the shame and the guilt feelings come from. Understand it for yourself, what it means for you. How does it make you feel? How does it then impact your day-to-day functioning and your interactions with others? Embrace your shame and embrace your guilt. It might be that it doesn't disappear completely, but embrace it. Embrace that it makes you feel like this. Why does it make you feel like this? And accept it to be your own. Accept it to be the feelings that you're currently stuck with or currently being faced with, because it is in the embracing that it almost becomes less uncomfortable for you, because you then are able to understand where it comes from, what it's all about, and it's where you'll be finding yourself in that particular space and time. Aim for acceptance, the serenity prayer. What can you change about the situation? What can't you change about the situation? What do you need to accept about the situation? Can you go back in time and change all that has happened? Can you have control of what's happening now? Can you change what's happening now? All of those things. So aim for acceptance. Most importantly, accept the things that you cannot change and accept the things that you don't have control over. Disclose. The more you hide it, the more shameful it becomes. Talk about it. In spaces where you feel comfortable, talk about it. Talk about the distress that's caused you. Talk about the impact. Talk about the experiences that you've just had with your loved one in addiction. Become part of a new community. Like in the space, the support group is a new community. Be involved with people who are experiencing the very same thing that you are going through or are experiencing. I just put a quote there to say, there you realize that you were not alone. In this forum, may you realize that you're not alone, especially to the new families that have joined. May you realize that you're not alone, right? Your pain is shared. The difficulties is shared. It might not be necessarily the same stories, but the fact that it's distressing, the fact that it complicates lives, the fact that it's a lot to deal with is one commonality that you all have with the other families here. Seek help for yourself, unpack the distress, trauma, and the pain you've experienced. It's very important to also process it for yourself. Process it as they process their program. As they go through the program of recovery, the program of changes, unpack it for yourself as well. Process for yourself as well. Initiate and start the process of healing for yourselves as well. This is also important in that when they get back home at some point, it'll almost be conducive that you journey together. You'd have at least also processed some of the difficulties and the issues that you yourself have experienced. Very important, compassion. We cannot not emphasize compassion because it's very important that you practice compassion. You are compassionate with yourself. You are compassionate with your family that are close to you that are also experiencing the very same thing. It's difficult for them. It's difficult for you. What you are able to do right and get right, you are able to do and get right. You've made mistakes, perhaps. You might be feeling like you've contributed in some way or form. Compassion. Treat yourself with compassion through the process of unpacking and understanding your own shame and your own guilt. We're now going to open the floor for any questions. Myself and my colleagues will answer you to the best of our ability.
Thank you for that, Palesa. I also want to add that we spoke about sharing. Right now, we just spoke about sharing guilt and sharing shame, because that's when it dies, is on exposure. So for any questions, for any sharing that any family members would like to do.
One thing that addicts can do is to split people, right? To almost then have everybody against each other. It's very important that together as a family, you show a united front. It doesn't matter that you believe that the parents, okay, it does matter, but it's not of pivotal importance that you believe that the parents or whoever has been enabling the addict, but together in front of the addict, show a united front. Show that you are in agreement. Show that everything that is that one person is saying is congruent throughout the whole family. That you stand for one thing. You stand for them to take personal accountability. You stand for them to fix their lives. You stand for them just to change. Right, because one thing that they can really do very well is to have you guys on different sides of the fence, if I might say so, and you end up blaming each other, and that almost shifts the focus, and then almost deflects, has them almost feeling like they can get away with everything, and that also perpetuates their level of denial, because it's like, if it's only two that are experiencing me this way, it's definitely their problem, not my problem. So if the whole family as a whole then speak in one accord, say the very same thing, it's very possible that they, as the people who are in recovery, will get what the family is saying. They'll be able to reflect, and they'll be able to see the seriousness of the impact of their behavior on the family as a whole.
I think it's a valid question, and I think it highlights such a key aspect in this, which is the enabling. Because you said discipline. It's not necessarily about discipline. It's about setting boundaries. So a boundary is a firm, decisive point, which you know when you're overstepping, you know when you're crossing that. So if you are wondering if you're over-enabling or punishing, then the likelihood is that you're trying to fix something that is beyond your responsibility to fix. Rather, think internally, what is being crossed for me? Where does my boundary lie? What is okay for me? What is not okay for me? And it's the transparency in that communication around where the boundaries lie, that helps families start to communicate in a more healthy way. Because enabling comes when you feel as though you've got to rescue, you've got to discipline, or you've got to do their recovery for them. You can't do their recovery for them. You can support them through it, and that means, encouraging them, etc. But it doesn't mean that you rush around finding the meetings for them, rush around doing that. Is enabling. And when behaviors are not appropriate in your house, then that's your boundary, and that's okay. And each member of the family through the healing journey needs to take some introspection and needs to take accountability for what their role is within enabling, within the addiction. And it's that which you take responsibility for. I know that in the past I did this, but going forward, this is no longer even a discussion. This is where my boundary lies, and that's it. So it's not punishment, it's boundary setting, and it's firm, and it's supportive. And that's, I suppose, why they call it tough love.
Thank you, Liaro. Any more questions?
There is a
Uh,
question in the,
Uh,
sorry, is somebody asking? So is
Yes,
the
I see
question,
Nikita is asking in the chat room, how does one go about building trust with a loved one in recovery, where their effort in recovery is present, but you struggle with guilt of not trusting them?
okay. Palesa, do you want to have a go, or Cara?
So my answer is very similar a lot of the time, and I may have actually said this last week in family support as well, in that there's a different healing time for everyone. There's in recovery, in treatment here, your addicted loved ones also are dealing with shame and guilt, and you might be as well. And the healing time is so different because you come into a 21-day, 24-day, or 28-day program, and it's group therapy and it's individual therapy and it's OT sessions, and there's so much opportunity to learn how to heal and to learn how to overcome or at least deal with this shame and guilt. So essentially my answer is that the healing time is different for people on a family support group like this if individual therapy and the 21-day to 28-day program is not used. So on the guilt of not trusting them, trust is earned when the behavior starts to change. So if you aren't being rushed into trusting them just yet, I think you might have a valid reason for that. A lot of this is based on a gut feeling. If your gut feeling is not trusting, then maybe ask yourself and ask your loved one as well, perhaps why you're feeling that way.
I was about to also say that it's in the actions. It's okay not to trust them initially or at the beginning, because they've said a lot of stuff. They've promised a lot of stuff, right? So it is in the changed behavior that you two get to see the difference, the change, and gradually, slowly but surely, they'll earn your trust, as the behavior becomes changed and as the positive behavior is reinforced more from their side.
Just to perhaps steer you in a direction, and I hear you, and you are there to support your loved one, which I think is fantastic. And I do need you to be aware that, sometimes in supporting our loved ones means that we've got to take away the things that enable them. So for example, freely giving gifts or freely giving presents or giving them pocket money, when actually they should be earning it for themselves, where actually perhaps they're already a man, or perhaps they're already an adult, and as such, comfort lending to unfortunately to an addict enables their behavior. If they can get something for free, they're not going to go out and do something different. So it's our responsibility as the loved one to say, no, I will support you in your healing, but I will not support you in your addiction. And that means that if you go out and you get a job and you earn your own income and you earn your own living, I will support you in that. I will love you. I'll be there. I'll be present and encourage you all the way. But when you're sitting at home, not doing anything, not working and not pushing forward, I'm not going to support that living. And here are my boundaries. And once again, we go back to that place where boundaries are so vitally important, because if we're giving them leeway not to do something, they will not do it. And that is as much on us as it is on them. Cara, there's a question that came through, and I think it links into Linda's one. It's a direct one, but it's obviously a confidential one. But so the situation is to us, but please explore dealing with guilt of some feelings of indifference about your loved one with their addictions recovery, as it's not always possible to have the capacity to support them in the way they need. And I want to reiterate on that. You know, as much as your loved one is in recovery and you do want to support them, absolutely, their recovery is also their journey. Okay, your healing from their addiction is also your journey. So whilst you can support them, absolutely, you don't always have to be fundamentally involved in it, because it is their journey and their responsibility. Cara, Palesa, anything you'd like to share on that?
I totally
No, go for it, Palesa.
Sorry. I totally agree in it being their responsibility, because here at Changes we drill so much, if I can say that, of the responsibility and the personal accountability. Don't excuse them of their responsibility. Don't excuse them of their personal accountability, right? They need to understand that they brought themselves to the point that they are. They need to take themselves out of the space that they're in, and they need to maintain consistently so over time the new behavior and their recovery. So be really firm in terms of reinforcing accountability. It's their responsibility. They need to take personal accountability for their actions and their behaviors. It's not yours. It's not your responsibility. It's not for you to account, but for them to take that responsibility and that accountability.
And I think just to add to that, Palesa, I think that's absolutely spot on. But I think it's about everybody in the dynamic taking accountability for their behaviors and ensuring that you work on healing and changing those behaviors that enable. So as much as they're taking responsibility for the choices they've made and for the damages that they've created, I think family dynamics also means that family members need to shift the way they behave and interact with the system itself.
Absolutely.
And thereby taking personal responsibility on all levels.
It's for the addict as well. Like we know, there's a lot of shame and guilt, and their support system might have been pushed away in the process of their active addiction, and also might not necessarily feel comfortable with telling people that they're an addict or an alcoholic. And my suggestion is that support is often found in the fellowship, and that's why there are fellowships for families, loved ones of addicts and alcoholics. I understand the complete difference between that and having your friends and your family as a support system, but that option is there for you as well.
Palesa?
I think it's really important to, and I think the last slide spoke about seeking help and reaching out, getting help for yourself, unpacking the trauma, the distress that you've been through. So more than focusing on disclosing to his family, focus on how do you best process everything for yourself. How do you best cope? How do you best navigate, right, the space that you find yourself in? Like you're saying, you're tired, you have been carrying all of this all by yourself. It could be that disclosing to his family perhaps could cause conflict between the two of you and in your marriage. So I would say, I don't know, Kate, but I would say, how do you unpack that for yourself? Seek help for yourself and process all of that for yourself in your own safe individual space. And then after that, and maybe perhaps when he is also ready to tell his family, then explore all of that together.
Yeah. And I think you're spot on, and I think both of you are. I think, you know, the important thing on Tlatla for you is to actually start tapping into support groups as well, because I don't think there's one answer to this question, and I think everybody's circumstances are quite individual with regards to it. But in order to get your clarity and your support, you need to be going to some form of support groups. You need to be seeing perhaps a counselor, somebody who you can be sharing this with, offloading it to, using the fellowship. The flip side of this is be cautious about keeping secrets. Secrets keep family dynamics sick. That's not to say that we go out and tell everybody. It's not about that at all. We tell select people to ensure that there's not reservation created through the secret. You know, if you're the only one, then it's only you that he is accountable to, and that's not a fair position to be in. But in order to explore what that looks like, you do need to reach out to people in a similar position, and reach out and join some of the codependency groups and those kind of things online, and get a sense of what we're talking about in terms of reaching out and getting the support. Secrets keep a family dynamic sick, but that doesn't mean full disclosure either. We've got to do what's in the best interests of all parties. You know, if people are going to stigmatize you and it's going to cause damage, then it's not worth it. But if it's somebody who's going to support on the journey, share in it, then we take that chance. But it is something that you are going to need to talk through and explore quite in depth, because one thing is for sure, you do need the support. You can't do it alone, and it's not fair to do it alone. But you're not alone, so just reach out and get the help that you do need. Through the process, and hopefully through the help, you're going to learn to understand, to say, no, that's not my responsibility. I'm not coming to drop this off. I'm not coming to do that. I'm not fetching you from here. If you choose to go out and drink again, that's on you. I'm not fetching you again. I'm not rescuing you from that. I have to, at some point, stand up for me and say, my healing is just as important. If you make the choices to go out and do it, I can't support you in your own demise. But if you choose recovery, I can support you. And that's where the tough love becomes quite tricky. And, you know, again, you need to unpack it a lot more and learn to understand, because there's a lot of shifts in how we think about things in terms of setting boundaries. And I would encourage you to do that, because don't do it alone. And please stop running around for whatever, whenever, however. That is not your responsibility as a partner, or as a sibling, or as whatever the relationship is. Assess whether that is actually your role. And if it's not, take a step back and say no.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Okay. There are two more questions. I am aware we're quite over time. Cara, do you want to read those questions?
Yes, I can. Sorry, I'm just clicking on the screen here.
Okay, I'll do it. I would tap on the issue of drifting the family apart. It almost happened with us, but in the end, we managed to put our focus on my son. The support became very strong. But the issue of trust, how does one earn it after this? Because the fear of him relapsing is a concern. And I think that's perfectly valid. And I think the fear of relapse will always be there. But I think, as Palesa was saying, it's in the action. It's in their, if they're doing what they need to be doing, we shouldn't be engaging in relapse. If they're saying, well, I feel like relapsing, well, that's great. We communicate around that. But they should have a support network that allows you to form a different type of relationship with them. Palesa, Cara?
I think with the fear of relapse, I like to live on a just for today basis as well, and just for today is something that I preach. But the fear of relapse, I'm sure it never goes away. your loved one can be 10, 15, 20 years sober, and the fear of relapse is going to be there. And that's because the fear of relapse is still there for them as well. And it's a good fear to have, because that means that you still know that you're an addict or an alcoholic. And there's a fear of returning to that behavior. That fear can be healthy, and I don't think it ever goes away. Perhaps using it constructively might be a way to deal with that fear.
Well said. I was going to say also a similar thing to say, and as much as we encourage those in recovery to take it a day at a time, as the family, take it a day at a time. Process what you have to process today, achieve all it is that you have to achieve today. Tomorrow, take it as the day comes.
Okay, so the next one is I'm learning about the link between ADHD and addiction, and amazed by the interlinkages. It seems to me that many of our addicts have ADHD, and we, our parents, try to help them and just make it worse, as we don't really understand the condition much. I think you're spot on. There is a lot of comorbidity between ADHD and addiction, but ADHD doesn't necessarily mean that you will develop addiction. There are a lot of other things that play quite significant roles, and I think as a we're learning more about ADHD and the connections between the two as well. If there's specific things that you're needing information is, please reach out to us. We do have quite a bit of information on some of the things that between ADHD and addiction, and we're happy to share that with you. Okay. How do I encourage the extended family to attend these meetings? I am finding so much enlightenment here. Okay. Cara, Palesa, how do you want to answer?
I would say share with them what you learn. Share with them what you learn in these sessions and continue to encourage them. And I think maybe in your sharing and what you've learned and how there's almost changed your perspective and almost supported you in your journey of supporting your loved one, maybe one day they'll also feel like I need and I can benefit from this, because you can't force a person, but what you can do is you can share what you've learned, how it has positively impacted you on your journey, and one day they'll might be open to also attending. But continue to share, and share the link with them.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And I think if time is an issue, if a 6 to 7 on a Tuesday evening is a problem, we have a YouTube channel as well where these meetings are shared, the presentation is shared, and your extended family members are more than welcome to have a look at the information presented on there as well.
And on the flip side of that, it's also not your responsibility to get them to go. You take on the healing and the learnings for you. You share them as you feel is appropriate and encourage them, but please don't take on the responsibility. If they're not wanting to and not ready to, they're not going to, and may become resentful of you asking, but always share. What they choose to do with them is absolutely up to them.